Hi, everyone. As you're trickling in, we're just going to wait until we hit the hour to start, but thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, we are glad you're here and we're excited to get started, and we'll do that in just a minute here. I see folks are still coming on in. Welcome, welcome. We're glad you're here.
We'll start in about one more minute.
Yes. And if you are here and waiting for us to get started, the chat function should be live, and you could feel free to say hello, let us know where you're coming from. We'd love to hear from you. I think it might be about time. Does your clock say? Mine says noon. I think yours says 11.
11. Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Let's start.
Okay. Go ahead, or I'll start. So welcome. I see some of you are using the chat function, telling us where you're from. We're really glad to have you. Welcome to AFPA's webinar, which is called Fad or Evidence-Based Diet, Paleo, Keto, Mediterranean, and more.
My name is Sasha Paricio. I have a master's in food and nutrition. I'm also a nutritional anthropologist, a researcher, an AFPA. I'm an instructional designer and a content writer. And I'm here with you from Guatemala City, Guatemala.
And hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Shana Walsh. I'm my PhD is in, the full title is Kinesiology, Exercise Nutrition, Health Promotion, which is a mouthful. I focus mostly on the health promotion side of things, and specifically around health behaviors related to like eating choices, physical activity, sedentary behavior, and things like that. I'm also a newly board certified health and wellness coach, and I hold the MCHES certification, which is a Master Certified Health Education Specialist. I would call myself like a health behavior theorist. That's kind of what I have studied and what I have researched in the past. And at AFPA, I am the manager of education and curriculum, and I am coming to you from Plattsmouth, Nebraska in the US, but you may notice I have a thick New York accent, and that's because I am from New York and I haven't been there for 15 years and I can't get rid of the accent. So and we will go ahead and get started. So I'd love to tell you, we've told you a little bit about us, and now I'd love to tell you just a tiny bit about AFPA. You may already know this because you have found this webinar, but in case you didn't, we have been around for 29 years. So we're founded in 1994 by Dr. Mark Okapinti and Amy Campbell, and we currently offer over 30 health, nutrition, and fitness training programs, and we're very proud to report that we have over 130,000 graduates from our programs all across the globe, which I'm seeing represented in the chat, and that is also very exciting to us. We're really glad that you're coming to us from all over. And today what we're going to do is, we've already gone through our introduction, so we could check that agenda item off, and then we're going to move into our main discussion, where we're going to go through some of the terminology that you may or may not be familiar with as it relates to diets and protocols, and what high evidence means and what it means. And so we'll go through some of the high evidence diets, and we'll talk about some that have limited or mixed evidence related to them, and then we'll kind of sum that up with our key takeaways. And what we are going to do in this webinar is we're going to have a nice question and answer session at the end. And to that end, let me tell you just a little housekeeping detail here. The chat function is live, and I already see many of you using that, which we appreciate. And you should feel free to use the chat function throughout the entire duration of the webinar. And you can use that for anything really, conversation, getting to know each other, just kind of maybe some points you want to add that might kind of enrich our discussion. We would love that. But if you do have a specific question that you want us to answer at the end of the session, we are going to reserve time for that. So please feel free to put that in the Q&A box instead of the chat box. You may see there's likely, depending on if you're watching this on mobile versus like a computer or a tablet, but most likely there's a menu bar somewhere, and one is for chat. That's the one for, for anything that you want to add. Q&A is the tab that you should click to enter a formal question that you hope that we will try to answer. As we reach the end of the session, we're going to save like 10 or 15 minutes to address those questions specifically, and we won't be able to find them if they're in the chat. So please reserve those for the Q&A, and then we'll wrap up and send you on your day. And we're going to try to keep this to about an hour, and we'll see how we do. We have a lot to say, Sasha and I, as always, so we'll do the best we can.
Thank you, Shayna. So as a kind of opening question, take a moment and ask yourselves if you feel like you know the difference, or you would be able to spot the difference between a diet or a dietary pattern, a medically prescribed diet, protocol, a fad diet, and a low evidence or low and mixed evidence diet. So these are some of the key terms that we're going to be discussing. They aren't, cut and dry definitions necessarily, but rather kind of like a checklist of things to consider, not only in how they're designed and how they're applied in a population on a population level, but really how they're applied on an individual level. So we'll be discussing that throughout. Now, this diagram will help us answer some of these questions about key terminology. And so one thing that's really interesting is usually when we think about the word diet, because of how it's used popularly, is that we think about, something really restrictive. So what is on your meal plan? You can't exceed a certain amount of calories. You can't eat after, a certain number or a certain time. But really, when we're talking, if in the nutrition world, when we're talking about nutrition, diet really is just a shorter way to say dietary pattern. And so what really is a dietary pattern is it's your regular eating pattern. So how you just tend to eat normally without necessarily having to refer to, a book or a piece of paper that tells you what your next meal is. So, what are the foods that you tend to eat? How often do you tend to eat? How much do you eat? When do you eat? All of that kind of composes your regular dietary pattern. And so when we talk about diet, and this is, when we talk about diet from an AFPA perspective in general, we use that nutrition terminology. We're just talking about a dietary pattern. Unless you say I'm on a diet, right? When you say I'm on a diet, you're usually referring to being on some sort of restrictive diet, right? That's kind of the popular terminology that's been adopted, being on a diet. Rather, my diet is, and you could describe your diet. So that's important to just recognize, is that even if you're not following a restrictive diet, you do have a diet, right? And so let's use that term as it is. Now, a diet differs. I think it can be helpful to talk about protocol before we talk about some of these restrictive diets. But so a protocol is a short-term intervention, and usually it's applied or adopted with a specific goal in mind. Protocols do refer to a specific health goal, and protocols are generally carried out with the guidance of a health professional. So in general, it's a detailed diet plan that states what a person eats, how a person eats, how often, when, and also usually what they drink as well. And it's usually used to test how a specific dietary pattern affects a health outcome. So this could be cholesterol, it could be digestive symptoms, autoimmune systems, or even allergies. So that is what a diet is. Now, a protocol, because it's short term, if together with a health professional, the individual does identify what specific foods or components in foods or food groups even are causing issues, health issues, then they can then transition into a potentially restrictive diet if they do find benefit from that protocol. Now, when the protocol is done together with a health professional, often that'll transition into a medically prescribed diet. So what are the foods that are causing issues? If you have allergies or you have IBS, then we can transition into a medically prescribed diet. So medically prescribed diet, as you can see from this diagram, is a type of restrictive diet, but medically prescribed diets, they do meet nutrient needs. They have a specific medical goal in mind, and they have high evidence to support their effectiveness in achieving that medical goal or health goal. However, they're not always easy to stick to, right? And I think that's an important thing to recognize as well, that just because, they're they're medically prescribed, that you're going to follow it just as the medical professional has recommended. Often, and really depending on a case-by-case basis, medically prescribed diets can be more or less difficult to follow. However, they have the immediate kind of bodily feedback that when they don't follow that medically prescribed diet, they do have negative health outcomes. Am I being clear up to now about protocol medically prescribed diet as a type of restricted diet? Anything you want to add, Shayna?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking about just an example of someone that I know who had gestational diabetes. So she was diagnosed with diabetes while she was in pregnancy. And so she had a medically prescribed diet by her OBGYN, or I think it was a midwife actually. And they told her that she needs to eat this certain amount of carbohydrates during her pregnancy. And then she had to take her glucose 5 times a day. And perhaps some of you have experienced this, or you know someone who has experienced this. And then, if she did it wrong, her glucose told her. So that was, and there were different protocols based on what that was. And so I think that might help kind of exemplify what we're talking about when we're talking about medically prescribed. And it doesn't have to be gestational diabetes. There are many others, like Sasha mentioned, but that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about that type of diet, for sure.
Yeah, and actually that's a great example. In that case, when you know what the medical issue is and the specific medically prescribed diet that an individual should follow or could follow, because sometimes there are options to increase health and well-being, then you don't necessarily need to go through a protocol. So often protocols are when you're unsure of what is going on in the body with regards to specific foods or food timing or food combinations. And then once you find out how your body is reacting to those foods, then you can transition to a medically prescribed diet, but that's not always the route that people take.
Right.
Now, related to medically prescribed diets and high evidence diet are high evidence diets. So high evidence diets, we are going to talk about them here, we refer to dietary patterns, specific dietary patterns that have a significant body of research that support their evidence for them being beneficial to overall health in the general population. Now you'll notice that there's, the little Venn diagram thing going on here. And that's because sometimes high evidence diets could be medically prescribed as well, but not always. So a person may choose to follow that doesn't necessarily have a specific chronic disease or autoimmune issue that wants to follow a high evidence diet, a diet that's going to improve their health. So but an example could be, plant-based diet or Mediterranean diet or something like that. So I'm giving you a little peek that those are some of the high evidence diets that we're going to discuss later on. But I think an important distinction here is that see how we see that high evidence diets are restrictive, but we have to note that for some dietary patterns that have a lot of high evidence or have a lot of evidence to support that they are beneficial for your health are not restrictive for everyone. What do I mean by that? So I mentioned the Mediterranean. If you live in Greece, Mediterranean diet is not a restricted diet. It's just that is how you eat, right? That's how your community eats or is likely to eat. And so that's what you eat on a daily basis. So you're not going to feel like that's restrictive. That's just your regular dietary pattern. So then you'll see the high evidence diet kind of, fall up here in the dietary pattern. But, as for someone like where me and you live, Shayna, in Guatemala and in Nebraska, when people are trying to follow, if an individual wants to follow, in a Mediterranean style diet, they may have to restrict certain foods and they may have to make a more significant effort to get their hands on other foods. And sometimes it also implies greater, monetary investment, making them sometimes out of reach for some people. Now, over here on this side, we have fad diets and limited and mixed evidence diets. So the important thing to mention here is that there is no cut and dry definition of a fad diet. And often it has to do with the application of certain dietary patterns in a person's life, right? So we'll talk about more in detail about what if some of the characteristics of a fad diet could be in an individual or population's life. But fad diets there has been no evidence to support that they are healthy. Sometimes it's not even worth it to do research because of what we know about what the human body needs to stay healthy. And just, it does not provide what the body needs what the cells need to function appropriately, especially over a long period of time. And then we have limited and mixed evidence diets. And so these are kind of like a gray area. They may be fit fad diets if they are applied in that way. However, some of them may be beneficial for some people, for individuals. There may be case studies that show that, a person benefits from it, but they are not generally recommended for a general population because of the potential risks associated with the adoption of that diet. And we don't really know what's going to happen in the long term, right? And so in general, you will not see some of the limited or mixed evidence diets being medically prescribed. And if they are, it's kind of a red flag as well. We want to feel empowered to make sure that what medical or health professionals are recommending do have evidence to support that I'll have a high likelihood of success on this diet, and that they are adopting those needs to me as an individual, right? Anything you want to add, Shayna?
Yeah, I do. I just want to jump in here and talk about, when we talk about evidence, like high evidence of effectiveness, say, what we want to talk about, because I think a lot of people, because of the fact that the word diet is used in multiple ways, we talk about diet as dietary pattern, but we also talk about diet as I am on a diet, which is almost always with weight loss as the goal. That may not be exactly what we're referring to when we talk about high evidence and low or mixed evidence, or limited or mixed evidence diets. We're not necessarily even talking about weight loss necessarily, but rather that they have evidence of promoting health in the long term. Does that make sense? So it's really this idea that, like, is this diet a healthy, sustainable option for a lifetime? And that's kind of what we mean when we say evidence, because it is possible, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, sneak preview alert, it is possible that a diet may lead to weight loss in the short term, which for a person who does need to lose weight, that could be a good thing. But what is it doing long term, and what are the health effects long term? And so we'll dive into that quite a bit deeper, but I just wanted to add in that little point of clarification about what we mean when we say evidence or effectiveness, as we're referring to diets in general. It's this health promotion, sustainable, lifelong, supporting health, promoting health, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to add to, we do recognize that the body of biomedical research, one is, Western focused. So it does prioritize Western culture. So definitely have to keep that in mind, even if when you are valuing kind of high evidence or just research, bodies of research in general. And the other thing I want to mention too is that not all, this diagram is just to help us talk about this terminology, but there are multiple other reasons why people would follow a dietary pattern, whether it's restrictive or not restrictive, that have nothing to do with health. That could be for religious reasons or spiritual reasons, or, well, allergy is connected to health as well, but we don't necessarily focus on these here, right? So just to recognize that those are important, those are valid reasons to follow, certain dietary patterns. Here, we're just focused on talking about evidence in terms of what exists in the imperfect world of research.
Perfect.
So when we talk about high evidence, we often talk about safety for the general population, right? So what makes diets and protocols safe? So they are safe when we have evidence to say, okay, there's evidence for a general population or the specific population, if you're talking about populations with specific conditions, to follow these recommendations in the long term, because it does support health, right, and well-being. It has to meet nutritional needs. So if a person cannot consume, is allergic to meats, for example, then we need to make sure that they are consuming enough high protein plant-based foods to meet those nutritional needs. And so luckily, we do know a lot about what our cells need to sustain themselves and to function properly. And so but there's a lot of ways to meet those nutritional needs, right? So we just want to make sure that is happening for when a diet or protocol is being considered safe or not. They should be balanced and varied. So not eating the same food or foods over and over. We want to make sure that they are varied. There's a lot of things, though we do know a lot about foods. There's a lot we don't know about foods. There's a lot of really good stuff in foods. that are doing things to our body that we don't even know, right? So we want to make sure that we are eating a wide variety of foods and are balanced in the sense that from different food groups or foods that have a different combination of nutrients. This is a big one. They're tailored to individual needs. And so recognizing that, yes, while evidence for recommendations for the general population are important, or for a specific population are important, we need to make sure that this is realistic for the individual. How is that making them feel? Are they able to afford eating these foods in the long term? Is it culturally adequate? Like, those are all things that we need to consider when whether this diet or this dietary pattern can be tailored to individual needs. They should be sustainable. So anything that is really short term, unless it's a protocol with a very specific goal in mind, it's going to lead to issues, which we'll talk to we'll talk to you about in the next slide. We want to encourage healthy habits, not only talking about diet. We want to talk about healthy or balanced mental health. We want to talk about physical activity. What type of liquids are we consuming? What type of relationship do we have with food? Those are all healthy habits to have. And lastly, this is in reference to medically prescribed diets or protocols in general. They should be monitored by healthcare professionals to make adjustments if needed.
Yeah, and I would jump in that the healthcare professional should probably be a registered dietitian. Would you say that's true, Sasha? That they're going to know the nitty-gritty, in my opinion, like potentially better than a traditional physician, because they're going to have the specific training.
Yes, and this is the case if a person does have a chronic disease, right, or an autoimmune disease, then yes, definitely speak to a person who is a professional nutritionist. And is permitted within their scope of practice to make individualized recommendations and to evaluate you clinically. Now, if you are generally a healthy person that wants to prevent issues, then you can talk to a nutrition coach, a health coach that can guide you in the right way, can help answer some of your questions and help you understand, some of the questions that you might have. But yes, if you are diagnosed or suspected to be have a diagnosis that is affected by diet, then yes, it is important to seek out guidance from someone who is specialized in either a registered dietitian or, depending on your state, a licensed nutritionist. Now, what are fad diets? I'm not going to read all of these, but I think it's just important to gloss over. And if there's any that kind of really stick out to you, Shayna, then we can kind of go a little deeper. And then also feel free to use the question box if you do want us to revisit these at the end. So in general, what does it mean when we're talking about fad diets? Again, this isn't, a universally recognized definition, but these are some of the characteristics you want to be looking out for fad diets. They tend to be like trendy or popular. So sometimes they're short-lived. They gain a lot of traction in the short term. Some people will talk a lot about their success on them in the short term, and then it's kind of fade out for whatever reason, whether because they lose popularity or the business that was promoting it, is not working anymore. And often they lack scientific evidence to support a lot of those claims. They often involve extreme restrictions, right? Without necessarily a reason for those extreme restrictions for the individual. So this could look something like eliminating an entire food group or drastically reducing calorie intake to the point where you feel sick and you know that your body cannot sustain this in the long term. Because of that, often it means, like, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop being on this diet for right now. Let me try another one, right? And so, or I'm going to take a break. And so that can lead to what's called yo-yo dieting. And sometimes yo-yo dieting can also lead to weight cycling. So weight gain, weight loss, weight gain, weight loss. And that's often because these fad diets tend to be focused specifically on weight, not on health markers, right? Not always, but for the most part, fad diets are, promise short-term weight loss, and that's why they gain so much traction. And because of that, it's potentially harmful to your health. And one of the kind of tricky things is that fad diets often do show a lot of short-term results, right? And so there's people they see the success of those fad diets within a week, even a couple of days, and so that motivates them to continue to do that. But they really are generally not sustainable in the long term. And because of this, it can lead to disordered eating, kind of a complicated relationship with food in general. You feel like you have to, every time you eat, you feel like you have to earn that food. You should never have to earn your food. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the results or the application or the use of the term fad diet really may be circumstantial, right? And so if there's perhaps a dietary pattern that has mixed evidence, right? So for some people, it may be beneficial, and they really do see that it has improved their health in the long term. But others, there's an individual who's really tried it all, right? It's tried it all, and they're applying those mixed evidence diets as fad diets, right? So I think that's important, is that we do have to recognize that it may be circumstantial. We'll talk about the keto diet specifically as being a circumstantial one in the future. Do you want to add anything, Shayna?
Well, I'll just jump in about the, again, there's no like one definition. This is a fad diet. This is it. It's kind of this, my general rule of thumb is if it sounds too good to be true, then it is, then it is too good to be true. And so, it's hard not to fall for this stuff. A lot of stuff related to dieting and related to food is very emotional anyway. And so and if somebody is telling you that they're having success, and then maybe you're even seeing it there, you can see it, they're having success. And they want to just shout it from the rooftops. It can be very, very easy and emotional to just say like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. But it is always a good idea to kind of keep that lens in mind of like, long-term health promoting across my lifespan, is this really going to solve the problems? And then when we talk about yo-yo dieting specifically, that's this whole idea that like you're going up and down and up and down and up and down in weight. And I can think of at least 2 or 3 people off the top of my head that I know have experienced this. And that is particularly harmful to health in the long term, not to mention that's physical health, not to mention mental health as well. But if you think about it, if you remember back to high school biology, you learned about homeostasis probably, and that's this whole maintenance of a stable internal environment, and that is what your body wants. And so when you're gaining weight, losing weight, losing weight, gaining weight, gaining, your body is like, I don't know what to do. I can't deal with this. And so it becomes even harder to lose weight, and it creates a lot of physiological issues,
vascular issues, metabolic issues, yeah. Absolutely.
Right. And what might seem like a good thing in the short term is like, I'm losing weight, but then if you're gaining it again and then losing it again, and it's really, in some ways, it's better to keep on the weight and maintain that for longer than to go up and down. And so that's kind of an important lesson to keep in mind, especially if you're working with clients and that type of work. It's that yo-yo is particularly harmful for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now let's look at some examples of high evidence diets. So just as a reminder, high evidence diets are those that are effective for the general populations or specific populations. So for general populations, like, yes, the general population could follow this diet and it would probably benefit their health. Or specific populations, so populations that have diabetes, populations that have hypertension, those would be medically prescribed diets, and they have shown high effectiveness for the management of these conditions. Additionally, they have to be evidence-based, they have to meet nutritional needs, they have to be sustainable, balanced, varied, et cetera, right? And encourage healthy habits in addition to simply modifying food intake. So first, you might have heard of this, the DASH diet plan. So the DASH diet stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. So this is specifically developed and researched based on a population that has high blood pressure. Was developed by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And the goal is to lower blood pressure and improve overall heart health. So the DASH diet has been proved effective in numerous studies showing significant reductions in blood pressure and also reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, and other chronic conditions. And this is a diet that's actually endorsed by the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology. So this would be kind of a classic example of a high evidence medically prescribed diet. It can also, because it is highly balanced, it could also be recommended for people who are at risk of heart issues. And, it's a kind of a side note, it can promote weight loss to help manage other conditions, but that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose of this diet is to help control hypertension. And the next example of a high evidence diet here is carbohydrate counting. And so carbohydrate content specifically for populations with diabetes, right? And so one thing to keep in mind about diabetes is it is a chronic condition that, as Shayna mentioned, like it will show up in your body almost immediately after you've eaten a food, because that's exactly what it is, right? There's a significant reaction of your body to eating food, especially when it is high in sugars, right, or carbohydrates. And so for the general population that does not have diabetes, your body is able to maintain the blood sugar levels or blood glucose levels relatively stable, right? But for people with diabetes, they can't. And so that's why it's more important to consider carbohydrates in this case. There are other ways to consider, but carbohydrates is the one that has been shown to cause, once you already have diabetes, to cause those blood sugar spikes. Now, carbohydrate counting is a meal planning method for diabetes management, and it does help to maintain these blood glucose levels more stable. And it can be used in conjunction with other diabetes management strategies, such as portion control, and it should be used in combination with healthy food choices. And it has been proven effective in managing blood glucose levels and reducing the risk of diabetes-related complications. Another diet, medically prescribed diet that has been used for people with diabetes is a low glycemic index diet. Now, this focuses on consuming foods that have a slower impact on blood glucose levels. So if we see the red line here, this is, imagine after you've eaten, right? So like the y-axis is right after you've eaten. And if you eat a high glycemic index meal, not just individual food, but a high glycemic index meal, you will likely have a spike in your blood glucose until your body is able to manage it, or you, if you do use insulin injections or an insulin pump, that would be another reason why it would go down. Now, if you consume a low glycemic index meal, then the spike will be much more managed. And one of the ways in which it's carried out is if you see that there are foods that have been researched that do have a higher impact on glycemic index than others. Some of the criticisms of this diet, though it has been proven to be effective and actually reducing not only blood glucose, but also HbA1c, is that there are often individual differences in how your body reacts to specific foods, right? So there was a study I read not too long ago, a case study of a person who did have diabetes, was trying to follow the low glycemic index diet, but found that tomatoes, which are not high glycemic index foods, cause blood sugar spikes in that individual. And other things to consider is how you combine foods. So certain combinations of foods can help to stabilize the blood glucose, even if perhaps one of the foods in that meal is in the high glycemic index list, right? So just something to consider.
Yeah, and overall, the foods on these lists have virtually nothing to do with like health for the general population. This is specific for a person who has diabetes and the way it reacts in the body, like the way the glucose from the foods works in the body. And so that's what this is about. Like this isn't, you wouldn't need to follow this. You wouldn't need to exclude high glycemic index foods. If you did not have diabetes, right? Like this is a specific,
or some other condition that is affecting, like PCOS. Some people find benefits in managing their glycemic index. Yeah, exactly. So this is designed specifically for people with blood glucose issues. Exactly. So this one spoken about all over the place, the Mediterranean diet. Sometimes we even forget there are people who live around the Mediterranean Sea, and that this isn't a prescribed diet necessarily in the ways that the previous ones are, right? Mm-hmm. This was an observation of people, it initiated with an observation of people who lived around the Mediterranean Sea, who in this way and who were generally a lot healthier than people in North America, right? And so what were they eating and what were they doing that was influencing their health? And so that's what the Mediterranean diet. So we can see at the base of the pyramid, and this is why, it's not only about food, it's about lifestyle. We see social interaction. We see you eat together. So you don't eat as an individual, you enjoy foods with others. You are, you are engaging in physical activity as a base of at the base of this dietary pyramid per se, right? And then on the next, we see a combination. We don't see kind of the food groups divided up as we saw in the old food pyramid that was promoted in the US. We see fruits, vegetables, olive oil, and grains all promoted equally here, right? Like that is the base of the diet. And then in moderation, you do consume seafood, fish, and then sparingly, you would consume chicken and dairy and eggs. And then every once in a while, you might eat sweets and meats, right? And so one of the things that's so interesting about the Mediterranean diet is think back to the initial diagram, right? For someone who is in the Mediterranean, it's just their dietary pattern. For someone who doesn't live in the Mediterranean, it might feel a lot more restrictive, but there's a lot of research to show just how beneficial this kind of eating pattern is for the general population. And so it does also encourage regular physical activity, which is one of the reasons why it is so important that it's not just about the food, it's about kind of the lifestyle that you follow along with what you're eating. Then some of the benefits, there's been shown a lot of benefits for gut health because it's really rich in fiber, antioxidants, healthy fats. It promotes diverse and balanced microbiome because it gives the microbiome what it needs to thrive. It's also associated with the reduced risk of IBS and colorectal cancer. It can help to manage autoimmune diseases because of the anti-inflammatory properties of the foods that compose the majority of the diet. But again, there's more research that is needed to establish clear connections between specific autoimmune diseases and the Mediterranean diet. It's also associated with the reduced risk of stroke, type 2 diabetes. And because it's so rich in omega-3 fatty acids, it might also improve cognitive function and reduce the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. And overall, the dietary pattern along with the lifestyle is generally linked to increased longevity and overall better quality of life. And then also people who do live kind of this Mediterranean-like lifestyle also generally see benefits to weight loss if that is part of your goal. Often if that's something that you seek out, but often the focus on just the health measures specifically, kind of weight loss is just kind of something that's tacked on while you do follow this. It makes sense, fiber rich, you're drinking a lot of water, you're happier because you are building up your social network and you're doing physical activity. So it makes sense, right? Of course, easier said than done, right? For any of these, it's not necessarily linked to you. Do you want to tackle this? You're really good at this, Shayna.
Sure. Yeah. So on this slide, we just have an image of kind of like a spectrum of different types of diets that may fall into some of these categories. And so you could see the biggest circle we have is the omnivore, and that's just in general people who consume both plant products and animal products. And then like shrinking down, you kind of start excluding more and more animal products. And so you have your pesco vegetarians. And so these people may exclude meat, but eat fish. So they may exclude red meat, I should say, and poultry. And then you have your ovo-lacto vegetarians. And so these are people who are consuming mostly plant items, but then they are also still eating eggs and dairy. And then vegans exclude all animal products completely. And one of the things that I want to point out here when you look at this is that you may not fit neatly into any one of these boxes. They're not boxes, but circles. And that is okay. It doesn't, I have definitely seen people, say like, well, I'm a vegetarian, and they accidentally ate something that had a little bit of bacon in it, and they didn't know. And they're like, oh no, I'm not a vegetarian anymore. And it's like, so what? It doesn't really matter what label you call yourself. It's your body doesn't care what label you call yourself, right? It's that's just us creating stuff, right? But really, it's what is your general dietary pattern, and these are some that people may follow, and that's it. And you don't have to fit neatly into any boxes, and it can change over time as well.
And so looking at what does the research say, like is this a fad diet? Is it not a fad diet? In general, what research has shown is the more plant-based foods that make up your diet, the greater benefit. Always ensuring that it does meet nutrient needs is kind of like a little asterisk there, right? So a plant-based diet that does meet nutrient needs is associated with a lower risk of multiple diseases, such as high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, certain cancers. And this is when it is generally considered nutritionally adequate. And you can make it nutritionally adequate if you plan your diet well, if you inform yourself about what your body needs and how you can meet those needs within the food that, meets whatever circle or box or way that you want to eat, right? And so, yes, in general, there's a lot of evidence to show that the more plant-based foods, whole plant-based foods that you eat, or minimally processed plant-based foods that you eat, the more benefit to your health in general. And I think one of the advantages of just looking at like plant-based versus non-plant-based is that it's a lot easier to accommodate it to your cultural foods and to your ecology. And so, a person who is eating in a vegetarian way or a plant-based way in Mexico will likely have access to a very different types of fruits and vegetables and grains than someone who's trying to follow in Kenya, right? Or is eating a plant-based diet in Kenya. And again, in some cultures, plant-based is just the way you eat, right? So India, for example, is mostly plant-based or vegan even, depending on where you are, vegetarian. So just to consider that there are a lot of different varieties of how you can live it out, but the general research does show that it is beneficial for your, just integrating more plant-based foods in general in your food is good for your health.
Yeah, and I like that Sasha clarified that like the whole plant-based foods, because you can 100%, and people do this, you can be vegan and eat mostly plain spaghetti with tomato sauce, canned tomato sauce, French fries, and drink a lot of beer. You're vegan. Like that's a way to be vegan. Is it healthy? Is it health promoting? No, not really, right? And so you can, you can do any one of these in any million different ways. So
perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. And we're not going to go into detail with these, but these are some other diets or dietary patterns that have been shown to be health promoting. Flexitarian diets would be kind of fit within that little oval there. Traditional Japanese diets and Okinawan diets, the Nordic diet, in general, diets that are low in saturated fats, and diets that do not exceed caloric needs. Also diets that minimize ultra-processed foods. Like those are generally dietary patterns that have been associated with improved health outcomes.
And now we'll switch gears a little bit and talk more about protocols. So you have diets, dietary patterns, which likely restrict something in some ways for some people, right? And then protocols, these are more of the like medically based short term, let's figure out what's going on so that we can then address it with a new diet and a new dietary pattern. So that's kind of what the difference between a protocol and a diet. And so we'll go through a couple of these. And the first one is really elimination, just an elimination protocol in general. And in an elimination protocol, what you do is you basically remove suspected triggers for around like 2 to 8 weeks at a time. It depends. And then you slowly reintroduce them one at a time so that you can track and see what's going on. So this involves first figuring out what your triggers might be. And then second, like avoiding them completely. And then as you introduce them, or reintroduce, I should say, you have to track very, very carefully. You have to do it one at a time, and you have to track very carefully so that you can determine, is this my issue? And there's a lot of nuance to that, because some foods, like we already talked about, you're going to get a symptom immediately. Your body is going to tell you immediately. And other things, it could be by the time it hits, say, like all the way down small intestine, large intestine, bowel, it could be 36 hours later. And so that's why it's so important to do the reintroduction really slowly and carefully so you can figure out what's going on. Like an allergy, that's going to hit you pretty quick. Some kind of carbohydrate malabsorption is going to take much longer. So, but that's kind of the point of an elimination protocol. There's many different kinds. And then the next slide talks about one specific one. And this is your low FODMAP. So perhaps some of you have heard of this. Many folks with functional gastrointestinal disorders are somewhat familiar with this. Generally, this is recommended for IBS sufferers, or potentially the SIBO, which is that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But low FODMAP is an acronym, FODMAP, and each one stands for something. So it's fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And what you do is you eliminate or limit a lot of these foods on the left that you see on your screen. And yeah, you basically cut all of these things out of your diet, and then you for 2 to 6 weeks or until symptoms subside, which takes longer for some folks, and then you slowly reintroduce them by category one at a time to see where the issue is. And FODMAPs in particular, the whole thing is this idea that it's likely like small intestine, large intestine where the issue is, and it's some kind of malabsorption of this type of carbohydrate. And for this reason, it's going to take a while. If you have a symptom 4 hours after eating one of these, it's not because of the FODMAP, it's something else. And so it's like, it's a very complicated procedure. Definitely recommended to follow this one with someone who's trained in FODMAP protocols, just because it is complicated. But this has very, very high evidence of success for a lot of people who suffer with these functional gastrointestinal disorders. It's complicated though. I am not going to lie about that. But again, a lot of people, they eliminate all these foods and then they slowly reintroduce, and then they're able to say, this is the thing, this is what's been causing me all my issues. And for so many people, it is garlic or onion. And if you do have nobody absorbs garlic and onion, like nobody does, but for some people, it upsets you more than it does others. Like, many people can just eat raw onion like an apple. My father does that. It's very weird. But other people, like nobody's absorbing that well, but for some people, it causes gastrointestinal distress, and others it doesn't. But if you find out that it was garlic or onion, it explains a lot of symptoms, because garlic and onion is in everything. And so, yeah, and then if you reintroduce them, you're able to identify what was causing you your issues in the first place. And you can adapt to a diet that doesn't include those ingredients, and you can feel better, which is an amazing thing, especially for people who have been suffering for months, years, decades. There's people that have had issues for decades and they didn't know.
Yeah.
So,
and just as a side note, unless you do have functional gastrointestinal disorder, or and specifically do find out that garlic and onion is hurting you, there's no reason to avoid garlic and onion.
no.
It does have a lot of really actually beneficial prebiotics and antioxidants as well. So, but
yes,
yeah, does upset you. That's the problem.
Exactly. And that's an important part of this entire protocol. So you eliminate these foods, you slowly reintroduce, you identify what's wrong. A lot of people, they feel better, and they're like, I don't even want to reintroduce anything because I finally feel better. Why would I put myself at risk? Well, you should put yourself at risk of having pain again, because the foods that are not causing you issues they contain important nutrients and compounds and prebiotics, and so a lot of people there's a lot of food fear related to this for sure, because it's like, I finally feel better, why would I do it? But you do it so that and then let's say you do find out what your trigger is, you're supposed to really technically try it again, say 6 months down the road. The gut microbiome it's ever changing. So something that you can't tolerate today, you may be able to tolerate in 6 months. And then the other piece, I saw a question come through and I just want to answer, does it include garlic powder and onion powder? And the answer could be yes, depending on what your situation is. There are people who could tolerate garlic and onion powder, no problem. And there are other people that even a shake of onion powder sends them to 3 days of pain. So it's, that's why you have to do the protocol. And that's the point of the protocol, is to figure out what are my triggers and in what quantity as well. And that's part of the reintroduction. There's a lot.
Yeah. But this is why it's so important to talk to someone who has experience in this, because it is, if that is your goal, it's not for everyone. It's meant for specifically a population of people who do have a functional gastrointestinal disorders. I don't know why I have trouble saying functional gastrointestinal.
It's a mouthful. And then there's another one. This is another elimination protocol, and this is the autoimmune protocol. And again, there's a class, people who have autoimmune conditions may benefit from eliminating these foods and doing a very similar process to what I just described. You eliminate them all, and then you slowly reintroduce, and then the categories are different than the categories for FODMAP, because it's a different disease, it's a different condition. And so, so you would eliminate these, and then you'd bring them back in and see what's going on, and you can reduce inflammation, promote gut health, feel better, which is always the goal.
Perfect. Then the last kind of group of diets we're going to talk about are limited or mixed evidence, which may include and do include fad diets. for the most part, they have very low fad diets, or those are considered, remember, very, very low evidence or really no evidence to show that they're effective for whatever it is that they say. And when we, again, kind of harping back to what we said at the beginning, we don't talk too much about weight loss. That's what a lot of diets kind of sell. But there really is there is a mismatch between perceived health as connected solely to weight and really biomarkers of health. And so we need to consider that as well. As is the primary goal here weight loss? Okay, let's think of some way to keep this sustainable so that you don't do the yo-yo dieting thing. But here, what we're talking about in limited and mixed evidence is for long-term health. Okay. So let's look at some classic examples of fad diets. You may or may not have heard of some of these. Now there's the grapefruit diet, which you just consume grapefruit or grapefruit juice with every meal. And then sometimes it'll also promote that you eat just grapefruit for one of your meals. And it claims to have fat burning properties. The cabbage soup diet, this is short-term, very low calorie. You consume large amounts of cabbage soup to promote rapid weight loss. And so you're kind of tricking your body into feeling full, really not giving it much what it needs. So, I mean, because cabbage is so low calorie, it makes sense that you would lose weight in the short term with it. The master cleanse lemonade diet, I remember a couple of years ago, there were some celebrities that became famous for this. Basically it's a liquid only diet, and it involves mixing lemon juice, maple syrup, cayenne pepper for over 10 days. And again, rapid weight loss. And it's for most people who follow it, they don't expect to maintain that weight loss. It's for, some specific goal, and really asking ourselves, is this really, is this really good for your body here? What's the goal here, right? HCG diet, also highly restrictive, very low calorie, and it combines injections or supplements of HCG, which is the human chorionic gonadotropin, to promote weight loss. So you have to injecting yourself or taking supplements with it. Again, not sustainable, just really not good for your long-term health. The blood type diet, this is a diet plan that is based on the premise that different blood types require different nutrients or foods for health and weight loss. There's no evidence to support that the blood type has anything to do with your food needs. Cookie diet involves consuming a specially formulated meal replacement cookie. There's some others that are very similar to this. If you remember, like the Special K diet, where you would eat a bowl of cereal instead of a meal. I think wasn't it 2 meals?
I think it was 2. Yeah,
2 meals.
I remember that.
So, I mean, of course, very, very low calorie. It's supposed to be fortified. So it's supposed to kind of, maintain or give your body what it needs to a certain point. But yes, I mean, the reason why these do work for short-term weight loss is because they're really low calorie. And then the raw food diet, a diet that primarily consists of consuming uncooked and processed and often organic foods. Nothing wrong with eating raw food. Please do eat raw food, but there's no evidence to support that eating only raw foods, fruits and vegetables specifically, can meet all of your nutrient needs. Now let's look at some that have been more deeply researched and really have really low evidence of their effectiveness, or just really mixed evidence. And so one is the carnivore diet. This is often used for weight loss primarily, or improving health markers and promoting overall health. And it does require a strict adherence to the dietary guidelines of promoters of the carnivore diet. And this can be really challenging for most individuals. Really, about the effectiveness, there's really, really low research, limited research available on its impact on overall health. But just based on what we know about what happens to the body when we do consume this amount of meat, it's very likely that in the long term, it will increase the risk of chronic diseases for most people. In the short term, it is potentially, you will see weight loss reduced, linked to just reduced calorie intake from the satiety or the fullness that you feel from consuming protein. But it eliminates all plant-based foods, so fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And so when we compare the carnivore diet to a more plant-based diet, right, where we have a lot of evidence to show the benefits of having a diet, or regularly consuming plant-based foods, eliminating those foods, you'll likely see, most people will likely see negative health effects on their body, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of anecdotal reports to show that some people do find benefits in this. There's very few health professionals that would recommend anybody follow this diet.
Right. But again, you will always find somebody who has tried something and it has worked for them. And the last thing that we want to do is ever like diminish anyone's individual experience, because we are all so different. And so again, I think Sasha did a really nice job explaining this, but I'll just double down on it. Like when we're talking about effectiveness or evidence, we're talking about a large body scientific, like these large clinical trials, and did they find that this is a health promoting diet in the long term? And the answer is no. Could one person find it and it works for them? Of course. And the last thing that we want to do is ever, kind of deny that. And then there are some versions of a carnivore diet involve eating meat that is extremely high quality. So you're never eating like farmed catfish. You're always eating wild caught this, and you're, I think they do including meat, eggs, dairy. So if it's eggs and dairy, these are like farm fresh eggs. This is dairy that's from grass-fed cow, and so there are definitely elements that may be health promoting, but in general, large body of evidence is carnivore health promoting for the general population across the long term. We haven't found anything that supports that.
Okay, now this next one is keto diet for weight loss and cancer treatment. And so we're very specific here about, the applications in which there's really low or mixed evidence that it is effective in the long term. But I think it's important to recognize that the keto diet is effective for a very specific condition in a very specific population. So it was developed in the 1920s to treat epilepsy in children, so pediatric epilepsy, and it was very effective. The epileptic episodes or episodes of seizure reduced significantly, which is why in children who do have epilepsy, the ketogenic diet ketogenic diet is still recommended for this population, or may still be recommended for this population. So that is why the ketogenic diet was originally developed. It kind of had a resurgence in the 90s, if I'm remembering correctly, not for this purpose, right? So it promised weight loss and kind of like hacking biology, making your body switch its nutrient source from glucose. Did I say that again? From glucose. I'm right. I was going to say gluten, but from glucose to ketones, right? And so just kind of the broken down version of fats as opposed to the broken down version of carbohydrates. And this has gained lots of popularity for weight loss and other health claims, including cancer treatment. The theory being that you're starving cancer cells of energy. Really, we don't have enough evidence to show that this is beneficial or sustainable in the long term for health, for weight loss, or for cancer treatment or other conditions such as diabetes, right? There is more and more research coming out, but we still are not able to say this is recommended for the general population, also because there are a lot of health risks associated with following the keto diet. Again, same as what Shayna said for the carnivore diet, some people find a lot of effectiveness in it. They find that it works for them. They find that they're able to sustain it. They find that they feel good. Their health markers are good. So some individuals may find success in it. For the general population, evidence shows it's not sustainable. And it does have health risks that may not be worth the risk. If that makes sense. And so that includes some of the health risks associated with the keto diet is, in the short term, the keto flu. It literally makes your body sick as it switches over energy source. Additionally, we have to remember that there are organs in the body that cannot use ketones instead of glucose for energy, including the liver, right? So the liver does need glucose to function. So you need, even if you do choose to follow the ketogenic diet, there does need to be some sort of carbohydrate input to give the organs that need glucose energy sources, right? Those who don't can lead to liver disease, can lead to kidney disease, and can lead to heart disease, depending on what the composition of what you do eat is, right? And if you're doing physical activity in combination with it, et cetera. So another thing to consider is you are at risk of nutrient deficiencies because it does cut out whole food groups significantly, right? So that's what the research says thus far. And one of the reasons why it may be considered a fad diet, especially if it's being adopted by a person who tends to try multiple diets, but it's not necessarily a fad diet. As for now, we can call it a low evidence or mixed evidence diet.
For sure.
Then we have the paleo diet. And so we have some great discussions about the paleo diet, Shayna. But essentially, what is the paleo diet? So it is a diet that is very high in protein, but the protein source or where you are getting those protein sources is important. So the quality of that protein. It's high in fruits and vegetables. So there are some brands of paleo diet, and I say brands because they're promoted by, people who may guide people along the paleo diet or, develop some sort of program that do restrict a lot of fruits and vegetables as well. So that really depends. Promotes healthy fats, nuts and seeds. But things that are not permitted in the paleo diet are grains, legumes, dairy, refined sugar, and ultra processed foods. So if you look at this at face value, this actually pretty good, right? You are eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, nuts and seeds. Some people who do follow paleo do eat a lot of protein, right? In general, high amounts of protein are not, necessarily bad for you in any way, and they can be beneficial for your body. Overdoing it can cause some health issues. And then as a nutritional anthropologist, I also criticize just the historic basis of this diet. The idea is that we are mimicking what we assume our Paleolithic ancestors ate, assuming that that's when the human race was healthiest, right? But I mean, we can go into more detail about this if you guys are interested. Feel free to stick it in the chat. But basically, there's a lot of errors with the historic basis of this diet, and it assumes a lot of things about what humans ate and did and their diversity in the Paleolithic era, and also discounts the fact that humans continued to evolve since the Paleolithic era. So what are some of the issues with this diet, Shayna?
In general, so a lot of the things are good. This is of these, this one's probably my favorite, but the exclusion of grains and legumes feels like that's the red flag for me, like given my understanding of nutrition and human physiology, because and the research basis, right? But like there are so many well-documented benefits for humans for whole grains and legumes, like tons of benefits. So by excluding them without any other reason to exclude them, like other people may need to exclude, there's a lot of people that have issues with legumes and grains, whatever, then yeah, you should definitely exclude them if they're going to cause harm otherwise. But if you don't have any of those issues, those are generally health promoting. And so I would imagine that benefits that people find from the paleo diet are because in general, they're eating more whole foods, higher quality foods, not necessarily because they have excluded grains and legumes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And also just some things to consider, because you are excluding these foods, which are important in most cultures, there is a greater risk of having nutrient deficiencies, including calcium, including vitamin D, because these are food groups that you are restricting that really could be beneficial for your health. So definitely something to consider. If this is a diet that has mixed evidence, again, there are many brands of this diet. The face value of the diet in general, it's like, oh, this is really not bad, but really we have to think critically of what brand of paleo are we considering? What will that mean for my long-term health? What will that mean for whether I enjoy my foods or not? Like, those are the sort of questions we want to ask ourselves. Then lastly, I want to talk briefly about intermittent fasting. So one thing to consider is that there are multiple variations of intermittent fasting, which is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to do research on intermittent fasting, because there are a lot of just variations of how you can take it on. And sometimes it's just has to do with food timing. Other times they're talking about food timing and what you eat. So just something to consider. That's why it's so complicated. But the basis is there are times of the day that you eat or times of the week that you eat, and times of the week or day that you do not eat, right? And so what are the different kind of versions of this? There's 16-8. So you fast for 16, it can be 14 to 16 hours, and then you have an eating window of anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. I think, Shayna, you know a little bit more about this, but it also does consider the type of foods that you eat with the goal of, sometimes with the goal of muscle gain, right?
Yeah, potentially. There's a lot of, this is why it's called the lean gains. Like a lot of people are do intermittent fasting because of they're working on muscle building, stuff like that. But in general, it's that feeding window. I only eat between, say, noon and 8 p.m. and that's it. But you could eat really whatever you want in that period in traditional intermittent fasting.
And then there's eat, stop, eat. So this method involves fasting for 24 hours twice a week. And then you might eat dinner, for example, like one day, and then not eat dinner again until the next day. So you'd be fasting for the full 24 hours. And there's the 5-2 diet. And so you eat normally for 5 days, and then you choose 2 non-consecutive days that either you don't eat anything or you just limit your calorie intake significantly to 500 calories. Alternate day fasting. As you know, the name suggests, you eat one day, you fast the other day. Sometimes you do not eat at all that day, or you can limit your calorie intake. And the warrior diet is you eat small amounts of raw fruits and vegetables during the day, and then one large meal at night, effectively fasting during the day and feasting at night within a 4-hour window. And then there's spontaneous meal skipping, which is really, you listen to your body. If you're hungry, you eat. If you're not hungry, then you just don't force yourself to eat that diet. That's, you know, essentially what it is. You can kind of guess from this one which ones are branded and which ones have companies kind of touting them, and which ones just are kind of adoptions of ways that people prefer to eat. So this is a tricky one. There is a lot of mixed evidence because of what I said initially about there's just so many ways to do it. Some of the biggest criticisms is even though it has been associated with potential health benefits, often those health benefits are associated to calorie restriction more than the timing per se, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely one gray area. Another thing is that for some people, it's really difficult to follow. Feeling like you are starving yourself, it's not healthy for your mental health. And so it's not good for your mental health. And so for some people, it's just, why am I doing this? And, you know, food no longer becomes something that you enjoy. It is now a chore, right?
Right.
So that's another reason why we want to be kind of aware of how we are applying intermittent fasting. The other thing is a lot of protocols don't pay attention very much to what you eat during those eating windows. So it's mostly about timing and calories. But from a nutrition perspective, we also want to consider, what are you eating when you do eat, right? What is that doing to your body? Are you giving your body enough of what it needs? That may be in reference to energy, right? Or calories. But when we're talking about nutrition, those nutrients, are you giving your body what it needs, right? So while it's not necessarily like a fad diet, because it's what it is a pattern of eating. It doesn't tell you necessarily what to eat. It's a pattern of eating. We do need to be considerate of that it should not necessarily be recommended to the general population, right? However, a lot of individuals find a lot of benefit from intermittent fasting, right? And there are, you know, they're mixed research, right? For specific health outcomes like longevity, if you want to talk about fat loss and muscle gain, if that is part of your goals, like there's a lot of mixed evidence. But if we want to think about dietary patterns that are sustainable for the general population, most people, it's really difficult to follow intermittent fasting. Did I miss anything, Shayna?
No, just again, the mechanism by which intermittent fasting has been shown to be effective is through caloric reduction. So it's this idea that if you can only eat in a certain window, or you can only eat on so many days per week, you will naturally not be able to make up those calories when you are able to eat. And so that's how the weight loss occurs. And so I had a friend who was doing this, and we talked about this, and he said like, look, if I could just eat healthier meals on a regular basis, that's what I would do. And he's like, but I can't do that because he's already tried. And so intermittent fasting, it worked for him. It was easier for him to actually set such a regimented schedule and follow that than it was to just like adopt healthy patterns overall. And so that's kind of where this like mixed evidence comes in. Like you will absolutely, I can count a handful of people off the top of my head that have found a lot of success with intermittent fasting. But again, what's the mechanism? How is it effective? It's just because you're overall reducing calories. And so if you could do that with a more traditional eating pattern, then you can just do that.
And also, if you do have a chronic or autoimmune disease, you want to be specifically careful of eating and fasting windows, especially if you feel that it might significantly impact your blood glucose. You might have episodes, you might have flare-ups. And so people who do have health conditions want to be particularly careful of diets that do restrict that restrict timing and caloric intake, because it can affect your body in a different way. And there are different factors here that kind of influence, like age, your health status, your activity level, right? If you are an athlete, intermittent fasting might be really difficult, especially if you train, late at night or early in the morning. Just personal factors as to whether it works or not for you. And then ultimately you can notice that we talked a lot about kind of gray area here. But I'd love if Shayna kind of went through this list and think about some questions that you might want to ask yourself.
Yeah. So if you're trying to, if you need to make changes to your eating pattern for whatever reason, here are some questions to kind of guide you in that decision making. And it's like, can you stick to this? Would a nutritionist or a physician recommend this? Like, would they, is it, and why or why not, right? Like, is it including that variety? Is it balanced? Let's talk about nutrient density. Let's talk about food ingredient quality, stuff like that. Do you depend on a company to send you a product? Because that's going to cost money, obviously. And so then that may eventually become unsustainable. Are you hungry? Are you in a bad mood a lot? Do you spend too much thought on deciding what you're eating? Is this contributing to disordered eating patterns, or an eating disorder, right? How is it affecting your exams and lab tests? And that's kind of something that we didn't talk too much about earlier, but something that people see all the time, especially if they try carnivore, they try keto, they try paleo, they may lose weight, like substantial weight in the short term, which seems like a very good thing, but not if their cholesterol has gone through the roof, right? Not if it's contributing to the stiffening of their arteries and increasing their likelihood that they are going to have a massive heart attack, right? It's like weight loss, good, usually, depending on situation, right? But lab tests, potentially more important. And then, does this meet your needs? Are you enjoying it? Something that gets neglected a lot when we talk about nutrition and food is enjoyment. And that's something that the Mediterranean diet gets right. They want you to enjoy your food, like enjoy it. We're meant to eat. We have to do it multiple times a day. Like, we should derive some enjoyment from that. And then how do you feel? How do you feel when eating this way? Do you feel good? Because that's also highly, highly important when you're considering making changes to a diet pattern that you're consuming.
Yeah. And so these questions, regardless of what category, how high evidence, ask yourself these questions. And that is the most important thing about really listening to your body, understanding what your body needs, and acknowledging the importance of lived experience too, right? With all of these.
Yeah.
And so rather than like a diet, AFPA came up with these quote unquote rules. We say rules because it's, they're not checklists, it's not something you need to stick to, rules in quotations, and more like guidelines, things to consider for healthy eating, right?
Yeah. Recommendations.
Yeah. Just general recommendations that have really high evidence to support each one of these. So again, eat a wide variety of foods, try new foods. Try foods that are different colors, like eating the rainbow is a good kind of strategy to make sure that you're eating a little bit of everything. You want to prioritize whole and minimally processed foods in your diet. These will contain a lot of really good nutrients and non-nutrients that are beneficial to your health. Consume plenty of fruits and vegetables. choose whole grains over refined grains. And yeah, do you want to take away the rest?
Yeah, absolutely. So including lean protein sources in general, I might even add high quality protein sources, healthy fats, limiting consumption of added sugar, which yeah, like cutting out the sugar sweetened beverages, stuff like that. Stay hydrated, listen to hunger and satiety cues, which I think is also often neglected. I can think of a lot of people that just, it's noon, so I'm going to go have lunch now, regardless of how big my breakfast was, regardless of how I feel, right? It's like you just eat on a routine, on a schedule, but really our bodies tell us what we need to know as long as we're listening for that, and then develop sustainable, healthy eating habits. And then number 11, my favorite, is enjoy what you are eating.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest one. I think that's really undervalued. It's when we talk about nutrition, we're talking about health. Are you really enjoying eating that way?
Right.
And when you do have, not everybody has the luxury of choosing, really, especially when we're talking about people who have very complicated health issues and do need to follow medically prescribed diet. Sometimes it's like, you know what, I actually don't enjoy eating this way, but I know that if I don't follow this, I don't restrict these certain foods, I'm going to feel really bad. And I prefer feeling good over, eating whatever that I want, right? And that's not the point either. So at the end of the day, are you enjoying your food in the complex sense of the word, right? Are you eating with others? Are you laughing as you eat? Are you really thinking about the taste? Are you eating mindfully? Are you eating food that connect you to your grandmother and your grandparents? Like, those are things that we want to value as well, when we're talking about eating, right? This is something that we have to do. So you shouldn't have to earn it, right? This is something that you need to survive as a human. And it's something that has always been an important part of our health and well-being and culture.
Yeah, I love that.
And here's some main takeaways as we wrap up here, and we'll open up for a couple minutes of Q&A. Is, diets, protocols, and fad diets serve different purposes, and they have varying levels of scientific evidence supporting their effectiveness, right? They don't necessarily fit in boxes. You got to listen to what is the big picture for you, what is the big picture for this population or for your goal, and see what's the most probable way that I'm going to achieve this goal. And then evidence-based diets such as Mediterranean, DASH, and low FODMAP diets have been proven to promote, or protocols, I should say, have been proven to promote health or manage specific conditions, while low and mixed evidence and fad diets often lack the scientific evidence to support what they say that they're going to do will actually occur and sustain itself in the long term. And they may also pose health risks.
Yeah, and I would say if you're exploring a new diet that you've heard about, you want to learn more about, that's probably where I would start. Let me look at the evidence. Let's see what, I don't care what, Mary Sue says on TikTok. Let me look at the evidence, right? And that's and then you can find, does it have a lot or does it not? And for what reason, right? And then the protocols are a little bit different. Protocols are these kind of something you would try in the short term to discover what's going on, if there is an issue, if it is a food or a sensitivity or an allergy or whatever. And so those examples are, you have the low FODMAP as a protocol before it becomes a diet if necessary, right? And then the autoimmune and any other version of an elimination protocol. And then once you have this information, then you can create, even without this information, if you don't have any of these sensitivity type issues, but you can create something that works for you, because what works for you is not going to work for the person right next to you and even other people in your household. It has to be individualized and support that long-term health and well-being. We're all so different. Find what works for you.
Yeah. And always consult with a healthcare professional. I would even prioritize what a registered dietitian or licensed nutritionist says over physicians, unless that physician does have dietary training, before starting any new extreme restrictive diet or protocol, and ensure that it is safe, that it's effective, that it will likely be sustainable, and then it's appropriate for your individual needs.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, we want to thank you so much. We went over time and we're so grateful that those of you who are still able to be here are still here. We do have some questions that have come through the Q&A, and so now is the time that we will start addressing some of those. So I will I'll start kind of throwing some questions out and then you or I can answer. Sasha, does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So we
Absolutely.
have a question about juicing in general. Where does juicing fit in? Do you want to go, Sasha?
Sure. Yeah. So juicing generally fits in kind of in like the cleanse, right? They're short term. Generally, those are considered fad diets, right? They're very, very short term. The goal is either to lose weight fast, or some people say to detox. Foods don't detox. Your liver detoxes. You can eat in a way to support your liver so that it does its job, but foods don't detox, right? In that sense, yes, juicing would fit as a fad diet in general, right? There are other reasons, like sometimes you have to follow a medically prescribed liquid diet, which is different, right? But I think ultimately we ask ourselves, what's the goal here, right? And if the goal is weight loss, reducing, yes, you will lose weight because you're going to be just consuming juice for a set amount of days. That's not going to be sustainable, and it's not going to be your nutrient needs.
Right. And I would add though, like if maybe you love carrot juice and so you bought yourself a juicer and you're going to have carrot juice to supplement whatever, absolutely nothing wrong with that. I will add though,
drink juice.
Yeah, enjoy your juice. But if you're trying to do like, I'm going to juice for 3 days and see what happens, yeah, I would definitely, Sasha's right on that for sure. There's not an abundance of evidence to support that. I want to add one more thing because I happen to think about juicing a lot, but when you juice, you're getting the juice, right? And so you're eliminating the fiber. You're eliminating all the fiber. And so it is in my opinion, it is better to eat the whole food than the juice, or to blend the fruit up in a blender. Like get yourself I forget what I have. I have the NutriBullet, I think, and I really like it. And then you're getting the whole fruit benefit. Which is going to include the fiber, but you can eat a much higher volume. So like I can eat 2 pounds of carrot in juice, but then I might turn orange. So I don't know. But you can eat a much higher volume if you juice versus blend, but I don't know that that's necessary. You can definitely get more benefits, I would say. So I would recommend blending over juicing in general. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Somebody asks here, is the Optavia a fad diet? I have not heard of the Optavia diet. Have you heard of it?
I'm a little bit familiar. I believe Optavia is one of the, it's a diet where you get your meals in the mail or you pick them up or something like that. But it's meals that are sent to you. And in general, it's lower calorie and it's lower carb. I don't know enough about it, to be honest, to like say yes or no. In general, I don't love diets where they send you your food, because it costs a lot of money. The mechanism by which they work is almost always caloric restriction. If you're eating prepackaged meals, you're getting way less calories than what you would normally prepare for yourself. And then thing 3, and I'm curious of your opinion on this, Sasha, I don't love prepackaged food because it by virtue of being prepackaged, it is processed. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not anti prepackaged food. Just because, for accessibility reasons, it can be really helpful. If you're really busy parents, prepackaged foods can be beneficial. We don't want to like villainize prepackaged foods. Sometimes there are prepackaged foods that are minimally processed. We do want to, think about that. But I think more important than those, like the packaging aspect of it, we want to ask ourselves, is this going to be sustainable? Like, do you want to plan to be on, in this case, the Optavia diet for the rest of your life? Like, is that, because often what happens is once you stop buying those meals, start cooking for yourself again, unless you've paid attention to, okay, what are the calorie restrictions, or what are, how are they planning their plates here? What does a portion size look like? All those sort of things, and then applying them for yourself, it's very likely that you're going to bounce right back up, or your health measures are going to change as to they were there before. So again, this is a good list of questions you can ask yourself when you're considering kind of switching diet or adopting a restrictive diet. Is it sustainable for you? Are you going to like it? Are you going to enjoy it? You're going to have to spend more money? Is going to be in budget? All those sort of things.
Right. I see a question here about organic versus inorganic for fruits and vegetables. What do you think, Sasha?
Okay, so from a nutritional standpoint, there's really almost no evidence to show that like eating food and organic is going to be more nutritious. And that sounds strange, right? Because you would assume that would be more nutritious, but there's really, really very little evidence to show that the nutritional difference is significant enough to have an impact on health.
Right.
However, what is the goal, right? So if you want to eat in a way that is more sustainable for the earth, then choose organic when possible, right?
Right.
Because in order to be certified organic, you have to implement more sustainable farming practices, and you have to treat your workers ethically. And we're not using practices that are have a lower probability of using practices that are affecting other crops and things like that. So from that standpoint, if that's your goal, yes, pro-organic. Now we're talking about the addition of pesticides and all that sort of stuff. It really depends. It really depends on what particular component that you are hoping to cut out is. If you do choose to go organic, it may be beneficial for non-nutritional reasons. Try to go to farmers markets and buy organic there. When you purchase them in supermarkets, they generally tend to be much higher cost. And often there are practices from when the farmer has farmed them to when they are in the supermarket that no longer makes them organic. So just things to consider.
Yeah, organic, inorganic there's a lot there. We could do a whole webinar just on that. Just to put it out there, in my own life, I buy some things organic and some things not. Because I buy wild blueberries. That's like a big one for me. If I'm going to eat blueberries, I want all the benefits. I'm going to get more from the wild, but I don't buy organic bananas because I feel like maybe I'm wrong on that, but I feel like to protect from the pesticides, the peel is sticking up. I don't know. That's kind of where I am. Okay, I see a question. We probably only have time for a couple more because we have gone so far over, and we are so grateful for those of you that stayed with us. And if you had time, of course. But so I see one question. I love this question. It says, with intermittent fasting, is breakfast still the most important meal of the day? And I love this question because breakfast being the most important meal of the day is something that was just like shoved into our brains with relatively little evidence, but it became widespread knowledge and it became a truth. But newer evidence is showing breakfast it's not make or break. It doesn't make or break anything. Have you learned or heard differently about this?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, breakfast is an important meal of the day. And as if I remember correctly, like, that was really the reason why it was kind of shoved into our brains, as you say, is because there were a lot of kids who would go to school hungry.
Yes.
And that does impact your ability to learn when you're growing. As you're an adult, you may no longer have that need. You may have enough food the rest of the day because you have full power over what you eat and when you eat as an adult, something you don't have as a kid. So just to give you a little bit of history, that's where that comes from. It's like, this public health promotion of, please, parents, don't send your kids to school without food. Like, they need to have food in their bodies in order to learn. They're going to fall asleep. They're going to be cranky. They're not going to learn. As an adult, that might not be the case for you. So I need to eat breakfast or else I'm cranky the rest of the day. So, and it depends on just a lot of different factors. So you just want to look at, the question was, if you're on intermittent fasting, is it the most important meal of the day? It really depends on what your eating window is and stuff like that. But again, personally, I'm not a big proponent of intermittent fasting. I feel like there are other ways, and this is my personal opinion. There are other ways to achieve the goals, but right. I do understand that for some people, intermittent fasting may make most sense, especially if they tend to not be hungry a lot of the day.
Yeah, and breakfast is all about that breaking fast. And so if you are doing intermittent fasting and you're not eating until, say, 11 a.m., noon, it could be even later depending on your schedule, you now haven't eaten for a long time, is what breaking fast is supposed to be something like relatively gentle on your stomach. And so depends, like, breakfast foods were supposed to be, I don't know that they are traditionally, but they were supposed to be gentle. And so, like, maybe your go-to lunch is like 2 slices of pepperoni pizza. That might be a little hard on an empty stomach as part of the breaking of a fast. So just something to think about. Okay, I see 2 questions here that to me are somewhat related. One is about there's just the low FODMAP in general. And then there's another question about like, what if I get information that doesn't quite make sense to me from a doctor, like from a physician? And so for both of these questions, I would say that like with the low FODMAP diet, it is generally highly recommended to undergo that diet with the help of not just a registered dietitian, but a low FODMAP trained registered dietitian, because it's such a difficult diet to adhere to. There's like one university out of Australia, it's Monash University. They do all the FODMAP research and like using their resources only, because other FODMAP information is outdated like 12 minutes after it's published, unless it's coming from their university. Like it's very difficult. And then, but a lot of times, people who maybe they're having IBS and they're having IBS symptoms. And so they go to a doctor and the doctor says like, try low FODMAP. And they're like, okay, what's that? Like, what do I do? And they're like, oh, just Google it. You'll figure it out. And that happens a lot. And some of it is because they don't have the time or they don't have the training to deal with this, like to deal with that type of protocol. And so we find that in other areas as well. So physicians may not have the most up-to-date or accurate recommendations available to you. And so I would say in some places, sometimes it is recommended to like advocate for yourself and get the most up-to-date, accurate information that you can possibly, and not necessarily take a physician's word, especially I see in the question that they're recommending like trans fats, they're recommending margarine, they're recommending, it's like, I might know better than them and I can trust that I do, and that's okay. So it is complicated. There was another question, Sasha, and I think we should probably end on this one because it's getting so late, but a trusted resource. Is there a place where I can go to find that accurate research, especially if I'm going to disagree with my physician or I'm trying to tackle something like an elimination protocol by myself? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, so in general, the kind of, government websites or association websites that are focused on research and often represent the interests of people that have specific conditions. So the American Heart Association. In the US, we can talk about, and this is iffy, the USDA. The reason I say USDA is that they do have pretty good general recommendations, but that's not to say that governments are not influenced as well by industry interests. And so universities as well that have a big public health program, for example, Harvard, the Chan School of Public Health, have really, really great articles. And they have actually an alternative to like the USDA healthy eating plate that focuses on water rather than dairy and things like that. So I think those would be my recommendations. Mm-hmm. Potentially government information, right? Potentially take it with a grain of salt. Organizations that represent the research and the interests of patients with specific conditions. So listen to them. And then I'd also recommend universities that often have the professionals that do the research and have really, really good blogs on their website. The example I gave was the Harvard P. Chan School of Public Health has a really good blog with really digestible information and, relatively balanced as well. So those would be my recommendations. And you want to add, Shayna?
Of course, I want to add the AFPA blog as well. Of
course, I sent a couple of blogs here.
Blog. If you haven't checked it out, you should definitely check it out. But no, that's fantastic. I wish there was go to this website. They have everything, but it doesn't exist at this moment in time. Maybe that will change, but
I do. Okay, I will send one last blog before we go that it's how to keep your information up to date.
That's good stuff. And as Sasha is sending that, I just want to take this moment to thank you so much for your time. We're so grateful to have you here, and we hope that this was meaningful. If you do have further questions, maybe we didn't quite get to your question in the Q&A, and I do apologize for that. You can always email info@afpafitness.com, and we'd be more than happy to help you there. Thank you so much, everyone, and take care.
Thank you. Bye.